Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, we talk about accelerating dynamic content to improve application performance and the user experience with the increase of remote and hybrid workers and more applications being delivered from the cloud. That can complicate IT's efforts to measure and improve application performance. So today's sponsor, Palo Alto Networks, is going to share its approach to accelerating dynamic content to enable high-performance applications, which leads to better user experience. Our guest from Palo Alto Networks is Subbu Varadarajan. He is Senior Director of Product Management. Subbu, welcome to the podcast. And can we briefly discuss the trends that you see affecting a company's ability to get these high-performing apps delivered?
Of course, specifically talking about dynamic content, well, let me give you a quick background. Say when you log on to Amazon.com or you go and log on to, say, Salesforce.com, the way you log in and what content you get is a function of who you are, what role you play in the organization, and what are the content that you have, which is very specific to you and your organization. What we mean by dynamic content is if Greg logs in, he's going to get content that's specific to Greg. And when you log in through, you're going to get content that's specific to you, which means traditional approaches like caching, which is if the content does not change, the same content can be delivered for a lot of users. We call them caching or static content. And industry was responding by caching them. But the moment the content became dynamic, then the challenge became, how do you even predict what somebody is going to do? How do you going to accelerate it? So the industry was still struggling to see if caching can be retrofitted. And the challenge was now 90% of the latency was happening because of dynamic content.
So you have identified a problem where typical things like WAN acceleration, TCP optimization aren't necessarily going to help because we're dealing not with static content that can be shared and pushed out and staged places. It's essentially content that is being created in real time. But how can you actually accelerate that then?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you a little bit of a story about, I believe that all smart people, if you actually put them in a room, they would arrive at a solution in the close proximity to each other. For us, what happened was my experience in the past was I worked in Akamai, which is, I would say, a very important content delivery network company.
Sure, Akamai knows a thing or two about caching.
and how to push exabytes of traffic, right? From then on, I joined a company called Shape Security. I was very early at the company, worked with some of the smartest people on the planet. And I learned how hackers use this thing called a botnet to launch attacks. So if you've heard of botnet from dark web, you can lease a botnet CDN, and you can launch attacks against anyone that you want, right?
Yeah.
And basically, myself and my co-founders, Kumar and Roy, we were asking this question: if the bad guys have this powerful tool called a botnet, do we have something similar for good guys, right? If you will, like a white hat botnet, if you will, right? Yeah. And we could not find one. So we thought, can we create something that will add value to the tech community by creating the world's first white hat botnet? Now, the reason is it's tied to the very question you asked. If dynamic content cannot be cached, how are you guys going to predict what content to fetch and what content you should not fetch, right? And the way I would map it to would be, say, for example, it's time to leave work to your home and you enter your home address and you hit Google Maps. What Google Maps typically do is they would say that, hey, these portions of the city are congested, and they will try to route you around it. And since we are all from the networking community, we have also been using that in our internet world, right? Where we used to call that path selection, or we used to call that congestion avoidance algorithms. And I'm
routing for dollars. You want the shortest path to the destination.
Exactly.
Right. So if it's in the cache, go to the cache. If it's not in the cache, go to the source, or go to a different cache potentially.
Right, Greg? So what we did was, hey, if there is a way to not go to the source, but get the source to you, right? So the way we can do that is we leveraged our bots. So in our world, Greg, when you log on to Salesforce.com, we spawn a bot. I'm going to label the bot Greg bot, right? It's not going to track you, but it has a one-to-one session mapping with your browser. When Drew logs on, we will spawn a Drew bot. Yeah. These bots have allegiance to you, the user, have zero allegiance to Palo Alto Networks, zero allegiance to the app, but it only cares about how do I enhance the experience for my user.
So the idea there is that the user does the same thing twice.
User, not twice all the time. It's basically what we do is going back to my Google Maps example. Instead of focusing on the path that takes most time, Greg, I'm focusing on what APIs are taking the most time and what APIs are heavily leveraged by users. Now, once you are armed with this, we call this information graph app graph.
Yeah.
And what we have found is the app graph for Salesforce.com would be very different from that of Concur or Ariba from SAP, right? These are amazing applications that enterprises use throughout, but they also give a very powerful signal, which is how real users are interacting with these applications. So when our bot gets loaded, going back to my Greg bot example, if you are interacting with Salesforce.com, we would spawn the app graph for Salesforce.com into Gregbot's context. So what Gregbot would then do is, hey, Greg is now coming to homepage. He's going to click on dashboard. Most likely he's going to click on this based on the heat map that millions of other Salesforce users are using.
It's almost like you're building a personalized cache just for each user.
Very, very true.
Right. So I'm going to Salesforce. And you create a context inside of the caching infrastructure for me. And I'm on this site. You could start to use, I assume that AI is a part of this in the future, if not now. You can say, if he's on Salesforce or Azure or whatever, Microsoft Office, these are the things that user context is going to do. So we can cache them per user rather than saying, in the old days, it was like there was a newspaper and we would cache the whole of the newspaper because 10,000 people in the company would read it at lunchtime type of thing.
Well, wonderful example, Greg, right? So I would just not use the word caching for the following reason. Right. The way I think about the word caching is you leverage disk, right? You store content in the disk ahead of time and you make it faster. What I think of, if you had to throw me a rope, the way I kind of like to map this is static content, like in the newspaper example, in the computer world, we call them, those content were, it got computed in the past, right? And the same content can now be consumed in the present by millions of users. That means you can store them in the disk and you can just take it from the disk and deliver to your users. Yeah. For dynamic content, you got to do the opposite, which is you have to compute the future. And the way you compute the future is by leveraging bot technology. So what our bots do is they understand, hey, this is how users would typically interact with Salesforce.com.
Yeah.
So they're now computing the future so that when real Greg comes and clicks on something, your bot has already got the content. So we are leveraging compute and not disk.
Right.
Okay. And the point is that you're sort of anticipating, maybe which set of APIs or which services are most likely to be called by Greg, i.e. Gregbot. And you'll get to those as fast as you can.
That's correct. And what we do is, because we are now decoupling the time it takes for the cloud to prepare the content, right? These are dynamic content, which means today the entire world is what I call reactive, which means once the user starts to click on something, then it starts the domino effect, right? Then it goes to the CDN. From the CDN, it checks the caching infrastructure. It's not, then you find the fastest way to the mothership where the apps are running. Then the apps now starts running. So think of this like a relay race. Once you click on it, then everybody runs, except apps are getting more complex, right? They're getting personalized. We are using large data set to get
using single page applications or PWA, print when accessed, all that. So like the whole context of rendering a web page is in a state of flux. There's so many front ends now, so much like React and all of the frameworks that we're using in JavaScript. You can't cache objects. You have to come up with a different way of accelerating the service, not accelerating the objects.
Exactly, right? And so what we realized was, what if we decouple the cloud latency and think of that as whenever the client app is requesting for something, if we already have the context, our bot would now deliver that instantly, because now through Palo Alto, we got the content. We also scrutinize the content for security, because we know Palo Alto is the security giant in the world. We're one of the best security companies. And with that, now we are bringing performance. And what I found to be fascinating was, while we were a startup, we were focused on e-commerce and streaming and media delivery applications. And when we came to enterprise application, it was very interesting to see how the top CIOs are combating security versus performance, right?
Yeah.
You must have security at the same time with the modern world. I was talking to our chief product officer, and he said something that was very interesting. He said something like, "Hey, if you think about how we had MPLS technology, right? Then we had SD-WAN technology. All these are amazing ways that as a technology, we are trying to figure out how to deliver the best experience. And now with Zykeda, you guys are now trying to figure out how do you customize the experience for every single user
Yeah.
by using machine learning, by using large data set.
It strikes me, but this is already very similar to what Palo Alto is doing with Prisma, because each user accesses the Prisma SASE, like in SASE, they access content scanning, logging, threat detection, threat analysis, permission brokering, and all digital experience monitoring, all those things. And what you're adding here is the next thing, which is to say, we're already doing all of this processing per user in a very real sort of way, but now you're actually adding this concept of, can we accelerate the application more?
Exactly, Greg. Right.
Right.
I think the way you mapped it was actually wonderful.
Yeah.
Our users today, when they use Prisma Access, they have the peace of mind that you get protection from zero-day threats. You actually get protection from data leaks and all that stuff, right? We are in the
That's right,
business
yeah.
of making sure you get the secure access to all applications, private or public. Now the question is, if you are a Fortune 500, if you're a G2K company, you have a distributed workforce, which means 90% of your workforce is outside your headquarters. And all of them are now accessing applications from environments that might not have enterprise-grade networking. Like you might be traveling and you might be accessing your app from airport. All of us have been there where we can say that it's less than ideal conditions, right? Or Starbucks. Or your home, where it might not have the same grade experience as your workplace.
Right.
What we figured out was if we can accelerate the dynamic content, and we can also understand how you are connecting to us. Are you having packet loss problems? Are you having some connectivity issues? And figure that out and customize the delivery for you, then you're going to have best end-to-end experience.
So does this mean the product is being delivered as part of sort of the ADEM, the Digital Experience Management or Monitoring Suite? Is there an agent involved? It sounds like it's also incorporating SASE. Can you tell me about all the pieces to get this capability?
Absolutely true. So the way this technology works is it's a turnkey solution. It's going to be an add-on on top of Prisma Access. So for all customers who are already having Prisma Access, they can now get faster than direct internet experience. And what I mean by that is, say you connect to salesforce.com with no security and say it takes 20 seconds to render a page. Now with us, we are now able to get the same page with full security enabled, but at up to 5 times faster than the direct internet experience, right?
Now, this isn't WAN acceleration. You aren't doing header compression or content inspection. You're not cracking the SSL. This is literally, to me, it sounds almost like there's a strong emphasis on predictive here. You can predict where the user's going next, so you can preload something.
Yeah, exactly. So we are doing the TLS encryption when it comes to app acceleration, and we are predicting. I think that's the important point here is we are trying to pre-compute the content on behalf of the user based on what is relevant for them contextually. Then
this is something we couldn't do 5 years ago or 10 years ago because we didn't have the compute, we didn't have the software, we weren't able to profile. This is where deep learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence has enabled this kind of ability to be able to do per user predictive analysis and say, oh, I can see this person has this profile, they're using this site, therefore I know something about what they're going to do next and I can preload or predictively do something to accelerate the traffic.
That's exactly right. I think any new technology that comes into our world, I look at that as two phases, right? Phase one is where we call this a playful toy, where we play with them, we enjoy them, but then are they enterprise ready? And what I mean by enterprise ready is, can it be dependable? Can it be applied for mission critical applications? And I think we are reaching an inflection point now where we can now rely on these technologies in a very predictive way. And
Yeah.
we can still deliver value
Yeah.
in a way that's 10x better than the past in a consistent manner, right, Greg? So I think that's the inflection point that enabled us to now use these technologies in real time.
What I want to ask is, if I'm here listening to this now, if I'm an existing Palo Alto Networks customer, is this just an add-on to my existing Palo products? Like, do I go to Prisma, add this, and then go to my Palo devices and start to enable the features? Is it that simple, or is there something extra?
Thanks for actually bringing that point out. This is just an add-on. So if
Yep.
you're an existing Prisma Access customer, it's just a turnkey solution for you. And to tie it to the Drew's question in the past, you don't need ADEM for this. It's basically, if you have Prisma Access, you can enable this, right?
Okay.
But when you have ADEM, Drew, what we are now doing is we are also taking all the real-time, we call them RUM, real user metrics. We
Mhm.
take that and we enrich ADEM. So now, if you're an IT person, you get, I would say, 2 point of view. One, even when there is no problem, we are now giving you an accurate depiction of how real user experience is getting impacted based on the traffic they are consuming, not synthetic test, but precisely based on what they are consuming and what are the disturbances that they are getting subjected to. Second, we also give him another lens that says, if someone has a problem, is the problem occurring in the cloud or is the problem occurring when they are connecting in the last mile, like in their Wi-Fi mile, if you will, in the client
Yep.
mile, having a bad Wi-Fi, blah, 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 right? So with this, we find that we can reduce their MTT or mean time to resolution metric significantly because there is no guesswork. If someone calls the IT person, now the IT person can clearly say, hey, you had these connectivity issues, and this is the reason you had this bad experience. Then we also go to the third step and say, by the way, this 95% of the time, we figured out that these were the reasons you were having the issues, and we also managed it for you. So which means users did not even know that they had a bad experience, but the IT guy knows how many such bad tickets they
Right.
avoided
Yeah.
using acceleration.
Yeah, because you're so deep into the application flow and you're seeing the interactions go backwards and forwards, you can start to debug whether it's the server side or the client side. You can even predict whether it's the network, because you're that deep into the flow.
Exactly.
Now, just something that struck me here, Subbu, is this sounds like there is definitely a capability to embed this inside of applications. This is something that's come on and off over the years where people who did WAN acceleration of various different types, you can actually take this and then embed it inside of the apps. I've seen it done in cruise ships, particularly where there was very long latency, long transmission times. Is that a direction you could think about heading in?
That's a very contextual question, Greg.
Yeah.
We are definitely thinking along those lines, and we are getting our early conversations have been very, very good so far. I'm sure we are going to share some exciting updates on that line, maybe in the next podcast or few. But there is, strong.
It's obvious. It's obvious. So once you've got an acceleration capability like this, you should embed it in the app. And so it always seems that's always something that's on the table, I think.
Exactly.
Well, with that note, that's all we've got time for. Thanks so very much to Palo Alto Networks for sponsoring today. And Subbu, thanks very much for taking the time to talk with us. It's this product is all his fault. So if you've got any questions and you want to find out more about it, head on over to paloaltonetworks.com/SASE/access. Ask him about the product and see if it, and as I said, we did ask the question. It's just a matter if you're already a Palo customer using Prisma, it's just a case of lighting up the capabilities and starting to do some testing to see if that works for you. And as always, you can find this and many more fine free technical podcasts over on our community website at packetpushers.net. Please like us on social media. Tell your friends. It's a huge help to us. And once again, thanks to Palo for being a sponsor. Without them, the whole network would not be possible. And last but never ever least, remember that too much networking would never be enough.